Thank you for being here today to honor my brother, my little brother, Ricky. And it's been amazing the last couple of days and really the last week and a half to see the way people have honored my brother, the Patriot Guard standing with their flags when the plane brought Ricky's body in, standing there at the funeral home last night for hours and hours, standing here this morning as we came in. The hundreds of you that have come through my parents' home and have offered condolences, the emails, the phone calls, the food. I hope that continues over the next couple of years. Those of you who are willing to stand for 2 to 3 hours last night to talk to the family and to express your honor and respect toward Ricky's service to our country. Those of you in the media who, instead of using this as a time of political propaganda, you've used it as a time to honor Rick. And I want to thank you for that. I've been joking with my brothers that it feels like over the last week we went kind of from honoring Rick to him just showing off. I mean, there have just been so many people who've come out, and we do want to thank you. In fact, our family does not really truly know how to adequately express how grateful we are. Just know that we're thankful. And just know that we are aware that for many of you, it required a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of inconvenience to be here today. But as was mentioned earlier, on September 4th, 1984, God gave Richard Joseph Nelson to this world. And I really believe it was an event planned by God. Book of Psalms says, "You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed." And the fact that we're here today to honor Rick is a surprise for most of us. During his first tour, he would call, and there was definitely concern in his voice. There was definitely fear in his voice. He was going through a lot of things that we would hope no military individual who's serving our country would ever have to go through. And then the second tour of duty, he was a lot more calm, and he would say he's pretty much bored. He'd say he's in an area that there's not a whole lot of activity, and we, of course, saw that as a good thing. And then, of course, the tragic news last Monday. And it took us by surprise, and so we're standing, or even sitting here this morning in shock. But I want you to know God is not shocked. God's not surprised at all. Because before Rick was ever born, God ordered his steps. He knew how his life would unfold. He knew where he would be born. He knew who his family would be, his brothers, his sisters, his parents, the city he would live in, the school he would go to. He knew what he would do for work. He knew who he would date and who he would marry. And he chose good. He knew all of that. And before Rick ever breathed his first breath, God knew how his life would end. And it's understandable today, and I think even within the family, there are feelings of different types of emotions, anger at times, frustration, sadness, of course. But I want to echo the words spoken by Job in the first half of the Bible as he stood at the funeral of his own children. He said, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. And in either case, blessed be the name of the Lord." And I want to zero in this morning on this whole idea that it is the Lord who gives. He gave Ricky to us. Ricky was a gift. He wasn't an accident. He wasn't a mistake. He wasn't an afterthought. He was absolutely a gift. And he took the 23 years that God gave him, and he tried to pack as much as possible into it. He tried to pack a lifetime of fun in just those short span that he had here on this earth. It's almost as if internally Rick knew that his life was not going to be forever. Those who knew him knew he was restless at all times. In fact, up until his second tour of duty, he didn't even have cable television because he thought it was a waste of time when he could be hanging out with people. And then he did get it for his wife while he was away on his second tour. But Rick was a guy who his friends have remembered this past week as an individual who wouldn't even take time to watch movies because he thought, why do that when we can be hanging out? And the only times he would watch movies if he figured there was absolutely nothing else to do, which in Kenosha, but he seemed to find the good of it. When God gave Ricky to us, he gave us someone who was absolutely full of life and someone who was absolutely full of energy. He was someone who was confident in who he was and who absolutely could joke about himself. In fact, if he were standing here this morning describing himself to you, he would probably just say the same thing that he put on his MySpace page about himself. I'm happily married, and I have a big head. Literally, it's big. Not like I have a big ego, I actually have a big head. This is why you don't let your brother speak at your funeral. But we love that about Rick. We love that he could laugh at himself and that he could make other people laugh. And we pause this morning to recognize, because we really believe it in our heart of hearts, that it is the Lord who gave Ricky to us. My cousin Mike described Rick this way. He said, of all of us grandkids, he was the most like Grandpa. That's how I picture him. As an old man, smiling, loves his wife, great with kids, and full of crap. I can't think of a much higher praise for him. And those of us who know Rick know how true that is. He was a trash talker. When he was visiting me in Seattle 8 months ago, we had an opportunity to talk with the quarterback of the Seahawks, Matt Hasselbeck. And Matt used to play for the Green Bay Packers. He was backup to Brett Favre. Of all the things that Ricky could have said to Matt when he met him, of all the compliments that he could have paid him, he shook his hand, looked him dead in the eye, and called him a traitor. But it was the Lord who gave that trash-talking, fun-loving brother to us. Richard was also a very determined person. He'd set his mind to something, and he'd pursue it with all his might, like a bulldog that latches onto something and doesn't let go. When I was 26 and Rick, 9 years younger than me, 17, I was home visiting when my parents lived in Racine, and he challenged me to a weightlifting contest. And I'll be honest, I was a little nervous. My brother had been working out, and I've not always been in this kind of physical condition. And so I looked at him, and I knew I might be in trouble, but I said, you go first. I wanted to see what I was up against. And he laid down on that bench, and he bench pressed 10 in a row. I can't remember the weight that was on there. I'm sure thousands of pounds. But he bench pressed that, and I was a little nervous, and I laid down thinking, oh, man, I hope I at least come close. And I couldn't even get the weight off of the bench press, or the bench. And I realized that just came from his determination, his self-will, the strength internally. There was a time when I was living in Southern California that he came to visit me, and he was goofing around in the grocery store, and he lifted 2 gallons of milk above his head. And so I challenged him to carry those gallons of milk above his head for a mile back to my house. And he did it. And he was so sore afterwards, but absolutely when Rick would put his mind to something, he would do it. He was so determined, and it was God that gave that determined person to us. Another aspect of Rick's life that stands out to me is he was extremely generous. He would do anything for anybody. And 2 days after I married Rick and Kristen just a year ago, I hadn't done my best to really plan my itinerary, and so I called Rick, who was honeymooning here in Kenosha, and said, hey, I need a ride back to the airport in Chicago. And him and Kristen came over within just an hour or two and happily drove me to the airport. And Kristen, I ask for your forgiveness today. There was a time where Ricky was visiting me in San Diego, and he wanted his buddy Eric to fly out and hang out with us. And I said, that's fine. And then I found out he was paying for Eric's ticket. And I asked, what kind of friends do you have? And then I met Eric. But Ricky was a very generous person, and the Lord gave him to us. He was also an organized person. So much so that Kristen, his wife, had the webcam set up in the apartment so that if Ricky ever called, it was immaculate around the area of the camera. And in the entire time Rick was in Iraq, there were only 2 opportunities that Kristen got to talk with Rick via webcam. And I believe it's through the grace of God that the second time she talked to him was 12 hours before he died. And when he called, they answered on a laptop. And Ricky, discovering that, had his buddy Jonah walk him around the apartment, giving him a tour to ensure that every room was clean. He was a detailed person. The Lord made him like that.